My stepfather claimed it was an accident every time he walked in on me changing. So I set a trap. The first time my stepfather walked in on me changing, I told myself it was nothing. The second time, I told myself I was being paranoid. The third time, I realized the problem wasn't the door. It was him. I moved back to Ashford Hollow on a Tuesday in early October, the kind of town where people waved even if they didn't know your name and nothing ever made the news unless someone's dog went missing. I was 23, freshly graduated, and broke in that special post-college way where your degree looked great on paper but your bank account said otherwise. The city chewed through my savings faster than I could rebuild them, and after 3 months of pretending I wasn't drowning, I called my mom. "You can always come home," she said immediately. "You know that." So I did. Mom, Diane, still lived in the same two-story house on Willowbend Drive. Same maple tree in the yard. Same creaky front step. Same pale blue paint she refused to change because it makes the house feel happy. She wasn't alone anymore. She'd remarried. His name was Thomas Reed. Everyone loved Thomas. Neighbors, co-workers, church friends. Even my friends from high school remembered him as the nice guy your mom married. He was soft-spoken, dependable, always fixing something. The kind of man who brought extra chairs to block parties and helped strangers jump their cars in winter. The kind of man who hugged me a little too long the first night I moved back in. "Welcome home, kiddo," he said, squeezing just a second longer than necessary. I ignored the tightness in my chest. People hug. I was tired. I was stressed. I was reading too much into things. That was my mantra for the first month. The first incident happened 4 days after I moved back. I just finished unpacking and took a long shower, trying to wash off the exhaustion of starting over. My old bedroom felt smaller than I remembered, but comforting. Posters still on the wall. Same dresser. Same door that didn't quite latch unless you pushed it hard. I was standing in front of the mirror in a towel, reaching for my clothes, when the door swung open. Thomas froze in the doorway. "Oh Jesus, Lena, I'm so sorry," he said, eyes wide. I thought this was the guest room. I was looking for the toolbox. He stepped back immediately, pulling the door shut. My face burned. "It's fine," I said quickly, though my heart was racing. "Just knock next time." "Absolutely," he said through the door. "Won't happen again." I told myself it made sense. He hadn't grown up in this house. We'd rearranged rooms when he moved in. Mistakes happen. Still, I started locking my door when I changed. Just in case. 2 weeks later, I stopped locking it. Nothing else had happened. Thomas acted normal, polite, distant even, always respectful in front of my mom, always asking about my job search. I started to feel silly for being cautious. That's when it happened again. I was changing into pajamas, door closed but unlocked. I just pulled my shirt over my head when the handle turned. The door opened. "Thomas." He stopped short, eyes flicking over me before he turned away. "Oh, sorry, he said quickly. "I thought your mom was in here." "She's in the kitchen," I said, my voice sharper than I meant. I'd heard her on the phone minutes earlier. "Right. Of course." He backed out. This time, something felt wrong. Not the mistake. The pause. The way his eyes hadn't looked confused, just startled, like someone caught doing something they weren't supposed to. That night, I lay awake replaying it. Maybe I was projecting. Maybe I was sensitive. Maybe I didn't want to be here and was inventing reasons to feel uncomfortable. I locked my door again. Every time. The third time was when I stopped lying to myself. Saturday morning. Quiet house. My mom had gone grocery shopping. I'd just gotten out of the shower and was standing in my underwear, about to grab my bra, when I heard the door handle move. Then rattle. Then click. The door unlocked. It opened. Thomas stood there holding a small silver key. For half a second, before he masked it, his face showed something raw. Not embarrassment. Not surprise. Disappointment. "Oh, I didn't know you were in here," he said. My heart slammed against my ribs. "Why do you have a key to my room?" I asked. He frowned. "It's a master key. For emergencies." "What emergency?" My voice shook. He scoffed. "You're being dramatic, Lena." Something cold settled in my stomach. "Get out." He stared at me for a moment longer than necessary, then turned and left. I locked the door behind him and slid down against it, shaking. That was the moment I knew. This wasn't carelessness. This was access. And he'd planned it. I didn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Thomas standing in my doorway, key in hand, his face registering disappointment before he remembered to pretend. That look haunted me. Because people don't look disappointed when they make mistakes. They look embarrassed. They look confused. They panic. Thomas had looked Inconvenienced. The next morning, I tried to act normal. That was the first rule I made for myself. Don't change your behavior yet. Predators notice shifts. They adjust. They test boundaries harder or retreat just enough to stay invisible. I didn't know how I knew that. I just did. So I smiled at breakfast. I asked about his work. I laughed at my mom's stories. And I watched him carefully. Thomas didn't avoid me. He didn't linger either. That was the unsettling part. He was perfect. Too perfect. He gave me space, but not absence. Always just close enough to remind me he was there. If I walked into the kitchen, he'd leave within 30 seconds. If I went upstairs, he'd appear downstairs shortly after. Always moving. Always present. Always watching. 3 days passed without incident. I started to wonder if he'd realized he'd gone too far and backed off. Then something small, but wrong, happened. I came home early from a job interview and heard Thomas on the phone in his office. I wasn't eavesdropping at first. I was just grabbing water when I heard my name. She doesn't suspect anything, he said quietly. My hand froze on the glass. She's cautious, though. Always locking the door now. I didn't breathe. I know, he continued. I'll be more careful. My stomach dropped. I backed away slowly, my heart pounding so loudly I was afraid he'd hear it. That night, I locked my door and pushed my dresser against it. I started keeping notes. Dates. Times. Where he was. Where I was. At first, it felt ridiculous, like I was writing a crime novel and casting my stepfather as the villain. But then patterns emerged. Thomas never entered my room when my mom was home. Never. Not once. He never accidentally walked in when guests were over. Only when we were alone. Only when I was vulnerable. Only when he could deny intent. The realization hit me like ice water. He wasn't reckless. He was strategic. And strategy meant experience. I tried talking to my mom. Not accusing. Not yet. Just testing the ground. Hey, I said casually one evening. Did Thomas ever mention a master key to the bedrooms? She looked up from her book. Master key. Yeah. He said he had one. She frowned. That's strange. I didn't know about that. My pulse spiked. You didn't give him one? No, she said slowly. We only ever had 2 spare keys made. One for the garage, one for emergencies. Why? I shrugged, forcing a laugh. Probably nothing. I just thought it was weird. But it wasn't nothing, because that meant Thomas had gone out of his way to get access to my room. That night, I checked the door. The lock had tiny scratches around it. Marks I'd never noticed before. Someone had been using that key often. The next twist came a week later. I was doing laundry when I found something in the pocket of one of Thomas's jackets. A folded receipt. From a hardware store. Dated 3 months before I moved back home. Item listed. Interior door lock, keyed, single cylinder. My hands went numb. He'd bought the lock before I ever arrived. Before he accidentally walked in. Before there was even an excuse. I put the receipt back exactly where I found it. Then I went to my room and cried silently into my pillow. Because this wasn't opportunistic. This was premeditated. I started researching quietly. Voyeurism laws. Invasion of privacy. Hidden surveillance cases. What I learned made my blood run cold. Most predators like Thomas don't start big. They start small. They accidentally see something. They test reactions. They escalate slowly. And they rely on one thing above all else. Plausible deniability. That's when I realized something else. If he was willing to unlock my door, what else was he doing that I hadn't noticed? I began checking my room obsessively. Behind books. Under the bed. Inside vents. I didn't find anything at first. Then, one night, I noticed my desk lamp looked different. The bulb housing wasn't seated correctly. My hands trembled as I unscrewed it. No camera. But there were fresh fingerprints. I photographed them. I didn't know why. I just knew I should. I told my best friend, Marisol, everything. She listened silently, her jaw tightening with every word. Lena, she said finally, this isn't about whether he's creepy. This is about whether he's dangerous. I know, I whispered. You need proof. I know. And you need to be careful. That was the understatement of the year. The breaking point came on a Tuesday afternoon. I came home early again. This time, the house was quiet. Too quiet. Thomas's car was in the driveway. I crept upstairs. My bedroom door was closed. Unlocked. I pushed it open. Nothing looked disturbed at first. Then I noticed my dresser drawer wasn't fully closed. My underwear drawer. My hands shook as I pulled it open. Things had been moved. Folded differently. As if someone had gone through them carefully. Deliberately. I sat on the bed, heart racing, and realized something terrifying. Thomas didn't need to walk in on me anymore. He already had access. That's when I stopped hesitating. That's when I stopped hoping it would end on its own. That's when I decided to stop him. The next day, while my mom was at yoga and Thomas was at work, I went shopping. I didn't go to a big electronics store. I went somewhere quieter. Somewhere discreet. And I bought 2 cameras no one would ever notice. I didn't feel brave buying the cameras. I felt sick. The kind of sick where your hands shake and your thoughts won't stay in one place. The kind where part of you still hopes you're wrong, even as another part is already planning for the worst. I parked 3 blocks away from the store so no one would recognize my car. I wore a baseball cap. I paid in cash. I told myself I was being dramatic, but I did it anyway. The cameras were small. Smaller than I expected. One looked like a phone charger. The other resembled a smoke detector, the kind no one ever looks at twice. Both had motion detection. Both uploaded footage directly to the cloud. I sat in my car afterward, staring at the bag in my lap, trying to slow my breathing. Once I set these up, there was no going back. Because if I found something, I would have to act. Installing them felt surreal. My hands trembled as I positioned the first one behind a row of old novels on my bookshelf, angled toward the door. The second I hid on top of the wardrobe, partially obscured by a decorative box. I checked the live feed on my phone. Clear view. Perfect angle. I tested motion alerts. Motion detected. My phone buzzed. I jumped so hard I almost dropped it. I turned the sensitivity down slightly and forced myself to breathe. Just in case, I whispered. Just in case. The first 2 days, nothing happened. No alerts. No strange activity. Thomas avoided my hallway entirely. I started doubting myself again. Maybe the key incident had scared him off. Maybe I'd finally overreacted. Then came day 3. Tuesday. I was at work when my phone vibrated on my desk. Motion detected. Bedroom. My blood ran cold. I stared at the screen for a full 5 seconds before opening the app. The live feed loaded slowly. Painfully slowly. Then, there he was. Thomas. Standing in my room. Alone. My heart began to pound so hard I could hear it in my ears. He didn't look confused. He didn't look rushed. He closed the door behind him carefully. Locked it. Then he walked straight to my dresser. My hands started shaking so badly I had to brace my phone against the desk. He opened the top drawer. Paused. Then opened the second one. My underwear drawer. I felt like I was going to throw up. He sifted through it slowly. Methodically. As if he had all the time in the world. Then he pulled out his phone. And started taking pictures. I watched him photograph my clothes. My body betrayed me. I gagged. A coworker asked if I was okay. I nodded, unable to speak. On the screen, Thomas adjusted the angle, took more photos, then he held one item up. Pressed it to his face. I slammed the phone face down on my desk. I couldn't watch anymore. I locked myself in the bathroom and slid down against the wall, dry heaving. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This wasn't a gray area. This was a crime. When I forced myself to check the footage again later, it got worse. Thomas didn't leave immediately. He stood there, listening, as if imagining me in the room. Then he did something I hadn't expected. He walked to my bed, sat down, and ran his hand over the pillow. I felt violated in a way I didn't have words for. After 7 minutes, he left. He locked the door behind him. I didn't go home that night. I stayed with Marisol. We watched the footage together. She went pale. "This is beyond sick," she whispered. "This is obsession." "I don't think this started with me," I said quietly. She nodded. "No, it never does." That evening, I backed everything up. Laptop. External hard drive. Encrypted cloud. Email drafts. I wasn't taking chances. Because deep down, I knew something else. If Thomas realized he'd been recorded, he would panic. And panicking predators don't behave predictably. The next alert came sooner than expected. The very next morning. This time, Thomas wasn't alone. He was on the phone. I turned the sound on. "She's gone most of the day," he said quietly. "No, she doesn't know." Pause. "I've been careful." Another pause. "Yes, since before she moved back." My breath caught in my throat. I know where the blind spots are, he continued.
She hasn't noticed anything yet.
I felt dizzy. Blind spots. How long had he been studying my habits? Then he said something that chilled me completely. I won't make the same mistake I did last time. Last time. My hands went numb. I showed the footage to Detective Alvarez that afternoon. He watched silently, didn't interrupt, didn't look away. When it ended, he leaned back and exhaled slowly. This isn't just voyeurism, he said. This is escalation. What does that mean? I asked. It means he's comfortable, Alvarez replied. And when predators get comfortable, they push boundaries. My chest tightened. Push how? He met my eyes. We're going to move quickly. That night, I went home with officers present. Thomas wasn't there. My mom looked confused and worried when she saw us. What's going on? She asked. I took a breath and told her everything. She cried, shook. Denial flickered briefly, but then I showed her the footage. Her face collapsed. That's not my husband, she whispered.
It is, I said softly.
And he's been doing this longer than we thought. The police confiscated Thomas's electronics the next day. What they found was worse than anything I'd imagined. Folders, hidden directories, dates going back 12 years, photos of women taken through windows, reflections caught in mirrors, sleeping bodies. Some of the locations weren't even familiar. Different houses, different cities, different states. Thomas hadn't just targeted me. I was just the one who caught him. Then came the final twist of part 3. Detective Alvarez called me late one evening.
Lena, he said carefully, there's something you need to know.
I sat down. We found footage, he continued, that predates your mother. My heart sank. Before she even met him, Alvarez said. Different victims. Same behavior.
How many?
I asked. There was a pause. Enough to know this isn't situational, he said.
This is who he is.
I closed my eyes. The man my mom loved. The man I'd lived with. The man everyone trusted. Had been hunting for years. And if I hadn't set those cameras, he would still be free. The house didn't feel like a home anymore. It felt like evidence. Yellow tape wrapped around my childhood hallway like a scar. Officers moved carefully through rooms I'd once cleaned for holidays, their gloves brushing over doorframes my mom used to decorate with photos. Every memory felt contaminated. I stood in the driveway watching Thomas's car get towed away. The neighbors watched too. Some whispered. Some stared. One woman crossed herself. And just like that, the man everyone trusted became the monster no one wanted to admit they'd lived next to. The news broke 2 days later. Not his name at first. Just a headline. Local man arrested in multi-year voyeurism investigation. No photo. No address. But people knew. They always do. By afternoon, my phone wouldn't stop buzzing. Old classmates. Distant relatives. People I hadn't spoken to in years. Some asked if I was okay. Some asked if it was really true. One message said, "Are you sure this isn't a misunderstanding?"
He always seemed so nice.
I deleted it without responding. Detective Alvarez warned me this would happen. When predators are exposed, he said, the world fractures. Some people accept it.
Others cling to denial.
My mother fell into neither category. She disappeared. Not physically, emotionally. She moved through the house like a ghost, barely speaking, barely eating. At night, I heard her crying behind her locked bedroom door. I wanted to comfort her, but every time I tried, I remembered the footage. And I didn't know how to hold both truths at once. The first other victim came forward on Thursday. Her name was Rachel. She was shaking when she sat across from me in the police station waiting room, fingers knotted in her jacket sleeves. "I saw the article," she said quietly, "and I recognized the layout of your house." My stomach dropped. "He used to watch me," she continued, "when I was 16. 16. My hands clenched. She described a sleepover, a guest room, a bathroom mirror that suddenly felt wrong. "He told me I was imagining things," she said. I believed him. Detective Alvarez nodded slowly as she spoke. He'd heard this before. Then came another. And another. A woman from a nearby town. A college student who'd rented a room from Thomas years earlier. A former co-worker's daughter. Different ages. Same pattern. Charm. Access. Gaslighting. Silence. By the end of the week, there were 9 confirmed victims. By the end of the month, there were 23. The media frenzy exploded. Now there were names. Faces. Photos of Thomas smiling at community events, overlaid with words like alleged and serial offender. I stopped leaving the house alone. People recognized me. Some hugged me. Others stared like I was contagious. As if I'd invited this. As if I should have known sooner. The worst moment came when my mother finally spoke. "I didn't protect you," she whispered one night, sitting at the kitchen table. I froze. "You were right there," she continued, tears streaming down her face. "And I didn't see it." "You didn't know," I said. But the words felt thin. She shook her head. "There were signs," she said. "I ignored them." That hurt more than denial ever could. The preliminary hearing was set for early spring. Thomas pleaded not guilty. Of course he did. He claimed the footage was misinterpreted. That the cameras were planted. That I was confused. That his victims were mistaken. His lawyer tried to paint him as a misunderstood family man. The courtroom murmured. Then Detective Alvarez presented the timeline. 12 years. Multiple cities. Encrypted folders. Victims who had never met, telling the same story. The room went silent. Then came the twist none of us were prepared for. The defense requested a private meeting. They offered a deal. Thomas would plead guilty to a portion of the charges. Reduced sentence. In exchange for one thing. Silence. A sealed record. No public trial. No victim statements. No testimony. My mother broke down when she heard. "I can't survive this going public," she said. "Please." I felt the ground shift beneath me. This wasn't just about justice anymore. It was about legacy. About truth. About whether silence was safer than exposure. I met with the other victims. We sat in a circle in a quiet room, coffee untouched. Rachel spoke first. "I was quiet once," she said. "And he kept going." Others nodded. One woman whispered, "If we don't speak, someone else will be next." I thought of the blind spots, the careful planning, the comfort, and I knew. This wasn't just my story anymore. That night, I emailed the prosecutor. "We will testify. All of us." Detective Alvarez called me the next morning. "You're sure?" he asked. "Yes," I said. "He doesn't get our silence." There was a pause. Then be ready. Because once this starts, there's no stopping it. I looked around the house. The cameras were gone. The evidence packed away. But the truth was louder than ever. The courtroom smelled like old wood and recycled air. I noticed it immediately, how sterile everything felt, how detached from the gravity of what was about to happen. Rows of benches. The judge's elevated seat. The seal on the wall that was supposed to represent justice. None of it felt big enough. I sat behind the prosecution table with the other victims, our knees almost touching. No one spoke. We didn't need to. There was a shared tension humming between us, a silent understanding that once we stood up, there would be no undoing it. Across the room, Thomas sat beside his attorney. He looked smaller than I remembered. Not weaker, just diminished. His hair was grayer. His posture slightly slouched. He kept his hands folded neatly, like a man attending church. When his eyes found mine, he smiled. A soft, familiar smile. The one that used to make adults trust him. I felt my stomach turn. The prosecutor began with the facts. Dates. Devices. Locations. Photos flashed onto a screen, carefully cropped, redacted, handled with clinical detachment. Even so, gasps rippled through the courtroom. A woman in the front row covered her mouth. The judge watched impassively. Thomas did not. He stared straight ahead. Rachel testified first. Her voice shook at the beginning, then steadied as she spoke. She told them about the mirror, the locked door, the way Thomas laughed when she said she felt watched. The jury leaned forward. Thomas's attorney scribbled notes. Thomas finally looked at her, and something changed in his expression. Not shame, not fear, annoyance, as if she were inconveniencing him. Then it was my turn. I stood on legs that felt disconnected from my body. I swore the oath, sat down, and looked directly at the man who had stolen my sense of safety. I told them everything. The key, the cameras, the footage, the blind spots. The moment my world cracked open, my voice stayed steady until the end. Then the prosecutor asked, "How has this affected you?" And suddenly I couldn't breathe. "I don't trust silence anymore," I said finally. "Because that's where he lived." The courtroom was so quiet I could hear the hum of the lights. The defense cross-examined aggressively. They questioned my memory, my motives, my emotional state. They suggested paranoia, jealousy, resentment. Thomas watched the entire time, his head tilted slightly, as if enjoying the show. Then his attorney made a mistake. She asked, "Isn't it true that you installed the cameras because you already distrusted my client?" I looked at her. "No," I said. "I installed them because he already had access." The prosecutor objected. But the damage was done. The jury had heard it. Then came the moment no one expected. Thomas asked to testify. His lawyer froze. The judge raised an eyebrow. The prosecution exchanged looks. Detective Alvarez's jaw tightened. This was not part of the plan. Thomas took the stand calmly. Too calmly. He spoke about his career, his marriage, his reputation. He described himself as misunderstood, lonely, helpful. He said the women were confused, that technology could be manipulated, that accusations spread faster than truth. Some jurors shifted uncomfortably. Then the prosecutor asked one question. "Mr. Hale, can you explain the folder labeled blind spots found on your hard drive?" Thomas paused. Just for a second. But it was enough. "That's not what it sounds like," he said quickly. The prosecutor clicked a button. A list appeared on the screen. Room layouts, camera angles, times of day. Thomas's face drained of color. Then he snapped. "They wanted attention," he shouted. The courtroom erupted. The judge slammed the gavel. Thomas stood up, pointing at us. "I never hurt anyone." Rachel flinched. "I didn't. I watched him unravel. Because this was the real man." Security restrained him. The jury stared in shock. His lawyer sank into her chair. The judge called a recess. In the hallway, my mother collapsed into a chair, sobbing. "I didn't know," she kept repeating. "I didn't know." I held her for the first time since this began. And for the first time, I believed her. The verdict came 3 days later. Guilty. On all major counts. The sentence would be severe. The judge called Thomas a calculated predator who abused trust and silence. Thomas didn't look at us as he was led away. He looked relieved. As if exposure was easier than pretending anymore. Afterward, the world felt strangely quiet. The cameras were gone. The house was empty. The story was over, for everyone else. But for me, this was only the beginning. Because surviving him was one thing. Learning how to live without fear. That was the real trial. The day after the verdict, I woke up expecting to feel different. Lighter. Victorious. Free. Instead, I felt hollow. Like a room after movers leave, everything technically gone, but the shape of it still pressed into the walls. Justice, I learned, doesn't erase damage. It only stops it from spreading. The world moved on faster than we did. News trucks disappeared within days. Headlines shrank from bold declarations to brief updates. Thomas's name became a footnote, then a statistic. People stopped asking how I was doing. They assumed closure had done its job. But closure isn't a door that shuts. It's a hallway you learn to walk without flinching. My mother and I sold the house. Neither of us could breathe there anymore. On the final day, we walked through the empty rooms together. She stopped in the hallway where the cameras once were. "I thought love was enough," she said quietly. I squeezed her hand. "It wasn't your fault," I said, not as forgiveness, but as truth. Some wounds don't require blame to heal. I moved into a small apartment with big windows and no shared walls. The first night, I slept with the lights on. The second night, I slept with the door locked. By the third, I slept. That felt like progress. The other victims and I stayed in touch. We didn't talk about him much. We talked about normal things. Jobs. Pets. Bad dates. Plans. Survival doesn't always look heroic. Sometimes it looks like laughter in a group chat at midnight. A month after the trial, I received a letter. No return address. Inside was a single sentence, handwritten. "Thank you for speaking when I couldn't." I sat on the floor and cried, not from pain, but from recognition. Some voices echo farther than we'll ever know. People still ask me if I'm scared. I tell them the truth. Yes, but fear no longer controls the room. It doesn't lock doors inside my head. It doesn't whisper that silence is safer. Thomas will spend most of his life behind bars. That fact matters. But it isn't the ending. The ending is this. I trust my instincts now. I believe discomfort is information. I know that survival is not weakness, and speaking is not cruelty. And when I walk into my home, I know every boundary is mine. Some monsters don't look like monsters. They look like family, neighbors, smiles. But they rely on one thing above all else. Silence. And silence didn't win this time.